The Henderson family arrived at the mansion on the hill just as the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the driveway. The moving truck rumbled to a stop, and John Henderson cut the engine, staring at their new home with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The mansion was grand, an architectural marvel from a bygone era, but its imposing silhouette against the darkening sky gave it an unsettling air. "Wow, it's even bigger than I imagined," Mary Henderson said, her voice tinged with excitement. She stepped out of the car and took in the vast estate, the sprawling gardens now overgrown and wild, hinting at years of neglect. "Dad, it looks like a castle," exclaimed young Sarah, her eyes wide with wonder. She held her favorite doll close, the one she never went anywhere without. Even little Timmy, just 5 years old, seemed impressed, though he clung to his mother's leg. John forced a smile. "Yes, it's something all right. Let's get inside and start unpacking." He glanced at the house once more, unable to shake the feeling that it was watching them, waiting. The front door creaked loudly as they pushed it open, revealing a grand foyer bathed in the golden hues of sunset, streaming through the tall, dusty windows. An elegant staircase wound its way up to the second floor, and ornate chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their crystals catching the last rays of sunlight. "Look at this place. It's like something out of a movie," Mary said, her excitement undiminished. She started imagining where all their furniture would go, how they would restore this magnificent house to its former glory. Sarah, meanwhile, wandered off toward the sitting room, drawn by the faint sound of a piano. She found an old upright piano in the corner, its keys yellowed with age. Curious, she pressed a key, and a discordant note rang out, echoing through the empty house. "Sarah, don't wander off too far," John called, his voice reverberating through the mansion. He felt a shiver run down his spine, but dismissed it as the chill from the open door. As they began to unpack, the family couldn't help but notice how cold the house was, despite the warm summer evening outside. Mary shrugged it off. "Old houses like this always have drafts," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. Hours passed, and as darkness fell, the house seemed to grow colder and more oppressive. John and Mary worked late into the night, trying to get as much done as possible before exhaustion overtook them. Sarah, too excited to sleep, continued exploring the mansion. She found herself in a hallway lined with portraits of the previous owners. The eyes of the figures seemed to follow her, and she shivered, feeling an inexplicable sadness. In the kitchen, John was rummaging through drawers when he heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible. He froze, straining to listen. "Mary? Did you say something?" Mary looked up from where she was unpacking dishes. "No, why?" "I thought I heard." John shook his head. "Never mind." The whispers continued intermittently, just on the edge of hearing, always fading away when he tried to focus on them. Eventually, he convinced himself it was just the wind playing tricks. It was well past midnight when they finally decided to call it a night. As they settled into their new beds, the house seemed to groan around them, the old wood settling in the cool night air. John lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds. In the room next door, Sarah clutched her doll tightly, feeling a strange mix of excitement and fear. She whispered to her doll, "Do you think this place is haunted, Ellie?" Her doll, of course, did not answer, but as Sarah drifted off to sleep, she thought she heard a faint giggle, like that of a child playing hide and seek. And somewhere in the shadows of the grand mansion, unseen eyes watched the new family, waiting for the right moment to make their presence known. The first full day in the mansion began with an unsettling calm. Morning light filtered through the thick curtains, casting an eerie, muted glow across the rooms. The Henderson family gathered in the kitchen for breakfast, their conversations punctuated by the occasional clink of cutlery and the rustle of unpacked boxes. John sipped his coffee, staring out the window at the overgrown garden. "We need to hire someone to help us with the yard," he mused, trying to shake off the lingering unease from the previous night. "Yeah, it's like a jungle out there," Mary agreed, her voice betraying a hint of nervousness. She forced a smile for the children's sake. "But think of all the fun we'll have exploring and making it beautiful again." Sarah, nibbling on her toast, looked up from the old diary she had found. "Mom, who do you think lived here before us?" she asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. "I'm not sure, honey," Mary replied. "We'll have to ask the real estate agent when we see her next. But it looks like they had good taste in furniture," she added, trying to steer the conversation to a lighter topic. Timmy, too young to grasp the strange atmosphere, was busy playing with his toy cars, completely engrossed in his own world. "Vroom, vroom," he murmured, driving a tiny car along the edge of the table. As they finished breakfast, Mary decided to tackle the living room, hoping to create a more inviting space. John planned to head into town to buy some supplies. "I'll be back in a couple of hours. Call me if you need anything," he said, kissing Mary on the cheek and ruffling Timmy's hair. Sarah continued to read the diary, her fascination growing with each entry. The previous owner, a woman named Eleanor, had documented her life in the mansion in meticulous detail. The entries started out cheerful and mundane, but gradually became more troubled. Mary and Timmy worked on arranging furniture in the living room, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling that seemed to permeate the air. "Timmy, can you hand me that cushion?" Mary asked, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. Timmy toddled over with the cushion, but his attention was soon diverted by a small door under the staircase. "Mommy, what's this?" he asked, pointing at it with wide eyes. Mary glanced over, curious. "I don't know, sweetheart. Let's take a look." She pulled the door open, revealing a dark, narrow passage leading down into the basement. A cold draft wafted up, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something faintly metallic. Timmy stepped back, instinctively sensing something was wrong. "I don't like it," he said, his voice quivering. Mary smiled reassuringly, though she felt a shiver run down her spine. "It's just a basement, Timmy. Nothing to be afraid of. We'll explore it together later, okay?" Meanwhile, Sarah continued to read. One entry caught her attention. June 12th, 1923. "I fear something terrible is happening in this house. Last night I heard whispers in the hallway and saw shadows moving on their own. Henry says it's just my imagination, but I know what I saw. I can't shake the feeling that we are not alone here." Sarah's heart raced as she read the words. The more she learned about Eleanor, the more she felt a strange connection to her. She decided to show the diary to her parents later, hoping they could help her make sense of it. Mary and Timmy were busy arranging a set of antique chairs when they heard a sudden crash from the kitchen. Mary rushed in to find a cabinet door swinging open and several dishes shattered on the floor. "What in the world?" she muttered, bending down to pick up the pieces. As she cleaned up the mess, a chill ran down her spine. She couldn't explain it, but it felt as though someone was watching her. She glanced around nervously, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Timmy wandered in, his eyes wide. "Mommy, did a ghost do that?" he asked, his innocent question sending a shiver through Mary. "Don't be silly, Timmy," she replied, forcing a smile. "It was probably just loose hinges or something. These old houses need a lot of fixing up, you know." But even as she said it, Mary couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. John returned in the early afternoon, his truck laden with supplies. He noticed the tension in Mary's face as soon as he walked in. "Everything okay?" he asked, setting down a bag of groceries. "Just a little mishap with the dishes," Mary said, trying to sound casual. "Nothing we can't handle." Sarah emerged from the sitting room, clutching the diary. "Dad, you need to read this," she said, her voice urgent. John took the diary, flipping through the pages. His brow furrowed as he read the troubling entries. "This is disturbing," he admitted, "but it's just a diary. We can't let it get to us." That night, as they prepared for bed, the house seemed to come alive with a chorus of creaks and groans. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the distant sound of whispering voices seemed to echo through the halls. Mary lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. John turned to her, sensing her unease. "We'll be okay," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. Sarah lay in her bed, clutching her doll tightly. She heard the whispers again, clearer this time, as if they were right outside her door. She squeezed her eyes shut, hoping they would go away. In the middle of the night, Timmy woke up crying. "Mommy, there's someone in my room!" he wailed, his small body trembling with fear. Mary rushed to his side, scooping him up in her arms. "Shh, it's okay, Timmy. It was just a bad dream," she soothed, though her own heart pounded in her chest. As she rocked him back to sleep, she glanced around the dark room, feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon her. She knew they were not alone in the mansion. Something or someone was watching them, waiting. The next morning, the atmosphere in the mansion was tense. John, determined to confront whatever was causing the disturbances, spent the early hours fixing loose hinges and securing creaky floorboards. Despite his efforts, the unease lingered, like a shadow that couldn't be shaken. Sarah was preoccupied with Eleanor's diary, her fascination deepening. She found a quiet spot in the attic, where sunlight filtered through a small window, casting an ethereal glow. The diary felt like a bridge to another time, and she couldn't resist the pull of Eleanor's tragic story. June 20th, 1923. Henry has been acting strange lately. He stays up all night, staring at the walls, muttering to himself. I fear the house is affecting him, just as it is affecting me. The whispers are growing louder, more insistent. I feel as though we are being watched, every moment of every day. Sarah shivered, feeling a chill despite the warm sunlight. She turned the page and a small, folded piece of paper slipped out. Carefully unfolding it, she discovered a faded photograph of a young girl with sad eyes, standing in front of the very same piano she had found the day before. Intrigued, Sarah decided to investigate further. She returned to the sitting room where the old piano sat silently. She ran her fingers over the keys, feeling a connection to the girl in the photograph. Hesitantly, she played a simple melody, the notes echoing hauntingly through the empty room. Suddenly, the air grew colder, and Sarah felt a presence behind her. She turned quickly, but saw nothing. The feeling of being watched intensified, and she clutched the photograph tightly, her heart racing. Meanwhile, Mary was sorting through the boxes in the living room, trying to bring some order to the chaos. As she unpacked a box of old books, she found a leather-bound journal with a lock. Curiosity piqued, she searched for the key, eventually finding it hidden in the lining of the box. The journal belonged to Henry, Eleanor's husband. Mary sat down and began to read, her interest growing with each page. Henry's entries mirrored Eleanor's, detailing their descent into madness as the house's influence took hold. July 5th, 1923. I can no longer deny the truth. There is something malevolent in this house. Eleanor is losing herself, and I fear I am too. The shadows whisper secrets, dark and terrible. I must find a way to protect us, but I do not know how. Mary felt a chill as she read the words. The similarities between their experiences and the Hendersons' own situation were unsettling. She resolved to share the journal with John, hoping they could make sense of it together. As the day wore on, the hauntings grew more intense. The sound of footsteps echoed through the halls, doors creaked open on their own, and cold drafts seemed to come from nowhere. Timmy refused to leave Mary's side, clutching her hand tightly wherever they went. In the late afternoon, John returned from town with a local historian, Mr. Thompson, who had agreed to help them understand the mansion's dark history. Mr. Thompson was an elderly man with a kind face, but his eyes held a deep sadness. "I've studied this mansion for years," he began, setting his hat down on the table. "The original owners, the Winters family, met a tragic end. Their daughter Lydia disappeared one night, and Eleanor and Henry were found dead under mysterious circumstances. Many believe the house is cursed." Sarah, who had joined them with the photograph in hand, showed it to Mr. Thompson. "Do you know who this is?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Mr. Thompson's eyes widened. "That's Lydia," he said softly. "She was about your age when she vanished. Some say her spirit still roams the halls, searching for peace." John and Mary exchanged worried glances. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture they formed was one of horror and despair. "Is there any way to put the spirits to rest?" John asked, his voice tinged with desperation. Mr. Thompson sighed. "There are old rituals, ways to cleanse a house of its dark past, but they are dangerous and not always successful. You must be very careful." As night fell, the family gathered in the living room, the flickering fire casting eerie shadows on the walls. They decided to perform the ritual, hoping it would free the spirits and bring peace to their troubled home. Sarah held the photograph of Lydia, feeling a strange connection to the lost girl. "We'll help you," she whispered, her resolve strengthening. "We'll set you free." With Mr. Thompson's guidance, they prepared for the ritual, gathering the necessary items and chanting the incantations. The air grew colder, and the whispers grew louder, as if the spirits were reacting to their actions. As they completed the final chant, a sudden gust of wind extinguished the fire, plunging the room into darkness. The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, and the shadows on the walls seemed to writhe and twist. In the midst of the chaos, Sarah saw her, a translucent figure standing by the piano, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Lydia," Sarah breathed, reaching out a trembling hand. The ghostly figure smiled sadly, then began to fade, the whispers growing softer until they disappeared entirely. The air grew warmer, and the oppressive feeling lifted, leaving behind a sense of calm. The ritual had worked. The spirits were at peace. But as the family breathed a sigh of relief, they couldn't shake the feeling that the mansion still held secrets, buried deep within its walls, waiting to be uncovered. The Hendersons had won this battle, but the war was far from over. With the spirits seemingly at peace, the Henderson family felt a temporary reprieve from the mansion's haunting grip. The days passed in a semblance of normalcy, but the uneasy feeling never truly left. They were always aware of the mansion's watchful eyes, lurking just out of sight. John immersed himself in renovations, determined to restore the mansion to its former glory. Mary busied herself with decorating, hoping to infuse warmth and life into the cold, empty spaces. Sarah, however, couldn't shake the memory of Lydia's ghostly presence and continued to delve deeper into Eleanor's diary. One afternoon, while exploring the attic, Sarah discovered a dusty box filled with old photographs and letters. She sifted through the contents, finding glimpses of the Winters family's happier times. One photograph in particular caught her eye, a family portrait with Lydia standing between Eleanor and Henry, all three smiling brightly. It was hard to reconcile these joyful faces with the tragic fate that had befallen them. As Sarah studied the photograph, she felt a cold breath on the back of her neck. She spun around, but the attic was empty. The feeling of being watched was back, stronger than ever. She grabbed the photograph and fled downstairs, her heart pounding. In the living room, Mary was arranging flowers in a vase. "Mom, I found this in the attic," Sarah said, handing her the photograph. Mary took the picture, her expression softening. "They look so happy," she murmured. "It's hard to believe what happened to them." Sarah nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. "Mom, do you think the house is really safe now?" Mary hesitated, then forced a smile. "I think we did the right thing with the ritual, but we should stay vigilant just in case." That night, the temperature in the house plummeted. The family huddled under blankets, trying to keep warm. Sarah lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the photograph of the Winters family clutched in her hand. She heard faint whispers just beyond the edge of hearing and pulled the covers tighter around herself. In the master bedroom, John tossed and turned, unable to sleep. He was jolted awake by a loud bang from the hallway. Groggy and disoriented, he got up to investigate. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the windows. As he walked, he heard soft footsteps behind him. He turned quickly but saw nothing. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice echoing through the empty hall. There was no response, only the continued feeling of being watched. He shook his head, trying to dismiss it as his imagination, and returned to bed, though sleep eluded him for the rest of the night. The next day, the unease continued to grow. The family pets, a dog named Max and a cat named Whiskers, began acting strangely. Max barked at empty corners and refused to enter certain rooms, while Whiskers hissed at shadows and avoided the basement entirely. One evening, as Mary prepared dinner, she noticed Max growling at the doorway to the dining room, his fur standing on end. "What's wrong, boy?" she asked, trying to soothe him. Max's growling intensified, and he backed away, tail between his legs. Mary's unease grew as she felt a cold draft brush past her. She glanced around the kitchen but saw nothing out of place. Shaking off the feeling, she returned to cooking, but couldn't ignore the sense of dread creeping up her spine. Meanwhile, Sarah and Timmy were playing in the sitting room when the piano suddenly played a single, discordant note. They both jumped, staring at the piano in shock. "Did you do that?" Timmy asked, eyes wide with fear. Sarah shook her head, her heart racing. "No, it wasn't me." She approached the piano cautiously, feeling a chill in the air. "Lydia," she whispered, her voice trembling. There was no response, only the oppressive silence of the mansion. John, hearing the commotion, rushed in. "What happened?" he asked, seeing the fear on his children's faces. "The piano. It played by itself," Sarah said, her voice shaking. John frowned, trying to maintain his composure. "Maybe it's just old and needs tuning. Don't worry, it's probably nothing." But deep down, he wasn't convinced. That night, as the family tried to sleep, the hauntings intensified. The whispers grew louder, the footsteps more insistent. Shadows moved of their own accord, and the cold draft seemed to follow them wherever they went. Mary woke in the middle of the night to find Timmy standing by the foot of her bed, his eyes wide with fear. "Mommy, there's someone in my room," he whispered, his voice trembling. Mary scooped him up, her heart pounding. "It's okay, Timmy. You're safe with me." But as she held him close, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. In the dark corners of the mansion, the spirits of the past lingered, their presence growing stronger with each passing day. The Hendersons had disturbed something ancient and malevolent, and now they had to face the consequences. The next morning, the family gathered in the kitchen, the tension palpable. John looked at each of them, his resolve hardening. "We need to figure out what's going on in this house. We can't let these spirits control our lives." Mary nodded, her fear replaced by determination. "We'll do whatever it takes to protect our family." Sarah, clutching the photograph of Lydia, felt a renewed sense of purpose. "We need to find out what happened to the Winters family. Maybe if we understand their story, we can help them find peace." As they prepared to uncover the mansion's dark secrets, the Henderson family knew they were in for a battle against unseen forces. But they were united, ready to face whatever horrors the haunted mansion on the hill had in store for them. The Hendersons began their investigation into the mansion's dark history with renewed determination. John and Mary decided to focus on the basement, where Timmy had discovered the narrow passage. Sarah, still clutching the photograph of Lydia, followed behind, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The basement door creaked open, revealing a steep staircase leading down into darkness. John flicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the thick, musty air. The family descended slowly, the atmosphere growing colder with each step. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a large, dimly lit space, filled with old furniture, dusty crates, and cobwebs. The basement was a labyrinth of forgotten memories, its corners shrouded in shadows. "We should split up," John suggested, though he didn't like the idea. "Mary and I will check the far side. Sarah, you and Timmy stay close and look around here." Sarah nodded, gripping Timmy's hand tightly. "Stay close to me, okay?" she whispered, trying to sound brave. As they searched, Sarah's flashlight beam fell upon an old, ornate wardrobe. She felt drawn to it, as if it held a secret just waiting to be uncovered. "Let's check this out," she said, guiding Timmy toward it. The wardrobe door creaked open to reveal a collection of moth-eaten clothes and a small brass key hanging from a hook. Sarah took the key, feeling its weight in her hand. "I think this might be important," she said, pocketing it. Meanwhile, John and Mary were examining the walls, tapping for any signs of hidden compartments. John's flashlight caught a faint outline of a door, concealed beneath layers of peeling wallpaper. "Mary, look at this," he called, peeling away the wallpaper to reveal a heavy wooden door. Mary joined him, her eyes wide. "Do you think that's the hidden room Mr. Thompson mentioned?" "Only one way to find out," John replied, trying the door handle. It was locked, but Sarah's brass key fit perfectly. The lock clicked, and the door swung open with a groan, revealing a small, dusty chamber beyond. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay. The room was filled with old portraits, personal belongings, and a large, ancient-looking book resting on a pedestal in the center. The walls were lined with shelves, each one packed with trinkets and artifacts from the Winters family. Sarah stepped inside, her flashlight illuminating the room's contents. "This must be where they kept their most treasured possessions," she murmured, her eyes lingering on a portrait of Lydia. John carefully picked up the ancient book, its cover adorned with strange symbols. "This looks like a journal or a ledger," he said, opening it to reveal pages filled with handwritten notes and drawings. As they read through the journal, they uncovered more about the Winters family's tragic history. The entry spoke of their growing fear and desperation as the house's malevolent presence became more pronounced. The final entries detailed a ritual they had attempted to banish the spirits, a ritual that had gone horribly wrong. July 12th, 1923. We performed the ritual tonight, hoping to cleanse the house of its darkness. But something went terribly wrong. The spirits grew angrier, more violent. I fear we have only made things worse. Lydia is missing, and Eleanor is inconsolable. I don't know how much longer we can endure this. Mary's hands trembled as she read the words. They tried to do exactly what we did, she whispered. But they failed. Sarah felt a cold breeze brush past her, and she turned to see a shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room. It was Lydia, her translucent form barely visible. Help us! Lydia's voice echoed softly, filled with sorrow and desperation. John stepped forward, his voice steady. Lydia, we want to help you, but we need to understand what went wrong. How can we make things right? Lydia's figure flickered, her expression one of deep sadness. The ritual, incomplete. The spirits, trapped. Find the missing piece, she whispered, before fading away. The family exchanged determined looks. We need to find out what went wrong with their ritual, John said, and we need to find the missing piece to complete it. As they continued to search the hidden room, they discovered a small, intricately carved box hidden behind one of the portraits. Inside the box was a collection of ancient runes and a piece of parchment with detailed instructions for the ritual. This must be it, Mary said, her voice filled with hope. This is what they were missing. With the knowledge they had gained, the Hendersons prepared to perform the ritual again, this time determined to succeed where the Winters family had failed. They gathered in the living room, the ancient book and the carved box laid out before them. As they began the ritual, the air grew colder, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. Shadows danced on the walls, and the mansion seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Sarah held the photograph of Lydia close, her voice steady as she chanted the incantations. We call upon the spirits trapped within these walls. We seek to set you free. The room grew darker, the shadows coalescing into a swirling vortex of darkness. The family continued their chants, their voices unwavering despite the growing chaos around them. With a final powerful incantation, the vortex exploded in a burst of light, and the shadows dissipated. The air grew warm, and a profound silence filled the room. Lydia's figure appeared once more, her expression one of peace and gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, before fading away completely. The Hendersons felt a wave of relief wash over them. The oppressive presence that had haunted them since their arrival was gone. The mansion, once a place of sorrow and fear, now felt lighter, almost welcoming. But as they embraced, grateful for their newfound peace, they couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was not yet over. The mansion had revealed its secrets, but its mysteries still lingered, waiting to be uncovered. The Hendersons had won a significant battle, but the war against the darkness that haunted the mansion was far from over. The days following the successful ritual were filled with a sense of calm and relief. The Henderson family began to feel more at home in the mansion. However, the shadows of the past were not entirely gone, and an unseen tension lingered in the air. One evening, Sarah was in her room, reading Eleanor's diary once more. She found herself drawn to the pages, feeling a strange connection to Eleanor and Lydia. As she read, her eyelids grew heavy, and she drifted off to sleep with the diary clutched in her hands. In her dream, Sarah found herself standing in the mansion's grand foyer. But it was different. The walls were pristine, and the chandeliers sparkled with light. She saw Eleanor, beautiful and radiant, descending the staircase with a smile. Lydia stood beside her, looking happy and carefree. But the dream took a dark turn. The light began to fade, and the mansion's walls seemed to close in. Shadows crept across the floor, and the air grew cold. Eleanor and Lydia's faces twisted in fear and pain, and Sarah felt a force pulling her toward the darkness. She woke with a start, her heart pounding. The room was icy cold, and she felt a presence hovering over her. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The diary lay open on her lap, its pages glowing with a faint, eerie light. "Help me," a voice whispered in her mind. It was Lydia's voice, filled with sorrow and desperation. Sarah felt an overwhelming urge to respond, but she couldn't move. Suddenly, the presence vanished, and the room returned to normal. Sarah gasped for breath, her body trembling. She clutched the diary tightly, knowing that something terrible was happening. The next morning, Sarah seemed different. Her usual cheerful demeanor was replaced by a somber, distant expression. She barely spoke during breakfast, and her eyes had a haunted look. "Are you okay, sweetie?" Mary asked, concerned. "I'm fine," Sarah replied, her voice flat and emotionless. She avoided eye contact and quickly excused herself from the table. John and Mary exchanged worried glances. "We need to keep an eye on her," John said. "Something's not right." As the days passed, Sarah's behavior grew more erratic. She spent hours alone in her room, muttering to herself and staring blankly at the walls. She began to speak in an old-fashioned manner, using phrases and words that were not part of her normal vocabulary. One evening, Mary found Sarah standing in front of the mirror, her reflection distorted and strange. "Sarah, what are you doing?" Mary asked, her voice trembling. Sarah turned slowly, her eyes cold and unrecognizable. "I am not Sarah," she said, her voice a chilling whisper. "I am Lydia." Mary's heart skipped a beat. "Lydia? But how?" "Lydia is inside me," Sarah continued. "She needs my help to find peace. You cannot stop her." Terrified, Mary backed away, her mind racing. She knew they needed to do something, but she didn't know what. She called John, and together they decided to contact Mr. Thompson, hoping he could provide some insight. Mr. Thompson arrived the next day, his expression grim. He listened to their account of Sarah's strange behavior and nodded thoughtfully. "It seems the spirits are not entirely at rest," he said. "Lydia's spirit has found a way to possess Sarah. We must find a way to free her before it consumes Sarah completely." Sarah, meanwhile, seemed to grow weaker with each passing day. Her eyes were hollow and her voice was barely more than a whisper. "Please help me," she begged, her true self breaking through the possession for brief moments. Mr. Thompson suggested a cleansing ritual, one that would require the family's unity and strength. They gathered in Sarah's room, the air thick with tension. John, Mary, and Mr. Thompson stood around Sarah, who lay motionless on her bed. Mr. Thompson began the ritual, chanting ancient words meant to banish the spirit from Sarah's body. The room grew colder, and the lights flickered ominously. Shadows danced on the walls, and a low, guttural growl echoed through the room. Sarah's body convulsed, and she let out a blood-curdling scream. "No! You cannot take her from me!" Lydia's voice cried out, filled with rage and desperation. "Sarah, fight it!" John shouted, gripping his daughter's hand. "You have to fight it!" Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she struggled against the possession. "Dad, I'm scared," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We're here, sweetheart," Mary said, her voice breaking. We're not going to let anything happen to you." Mr. Thompson's chants grew louder, more insistent. The shadows seemed to writhe and twist, forming into a dark, menacing shape. It lunged towards Sarah, but John and Mary held their ground, their love for their daughter giving them strength. With a final, powerful incantation, Mr. Thompson completed the ritual. The dark shape dissipated, and the room was filled with a blinding light. Sarah's body relaxed, and she let out a sigh of relief. "Lydia is gone," Mr. Thompson said, his voice weary but triumphant. "Sarah is safe." The family embraced, tears of relief and joy streaming down their faces. The mansion seemed to breathe a sigh of relief as well, the oppressive presence lifting. But as they held each other, they knew that their battle with the mansion's dark forces was far from over. The spirits of the past were still restless, and the Hendersons would have to remain vigilant, ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead. The mansion on the hill had many more secrets to reveal, and the Henderson family was determined to uncover them all, no matter the cost. The days following the cleansing ritual were fraught with tension. Although Lydia's spirit had been exorcised from Sarah, the mansion remained a place of unease. Each family member grappled with their own fears, haunted by the sense that the darkness had not fully departed. John threw himself into renovations with a fervor that bordered on obsession. He worked from dawn till dusk, barely taking breaks, his eyes red-rimmed and haunted. He was determined to make the house safe for his family, but the strain was beginning to take its toll. One evening, as John worked alone in the attic, he heard a faint humming. He paused, listening intently. The sound grew louder, more distinct. It was a lullaby, sweet, yet unnerving. He followed the sound to a corner of the attic, where an old rocking chair sat, moving slowly back and forth on its own. "Who's there?" John demanded, his voice echoing in the empty space. The humming stopped abruptly and the chair stilled. He shook his head, trying to dispel the creeping fear. "It's just my imagination," he muttered, returning to his work. But as the days wore on, John's grip on reality began to slip. He started seeing shadows move out of the corner of his eye, hearing whispers that stopped when he tried to listen. The mansion's oppressive presence seemed to grow stronger, feeding on his fear and exhaustion. Mary, too, was struggling. She was plagued by vivid nightmares, each one more terrifying than the last. She dreamed of being trapped in the mansion, its walls closing in on her, the spirits of the past reaching out with ghostly hands. She woke each morning drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. One night, as she lay awake, she heard a soft knock on the bedroom door. She got up to investigate, finding Sarah standing in the hallway, her eyes wide with fear. "Mom, I can't sleep," Sarah whispered. "The shadows keep moving and I hear voices." Mary pulled Sarah into a comforting embrace. "It's okay, sweetie. You're safe. We'll get through this together." But deep down, Mary wasn't sure if they would. The mansion seemed to be driving them all to the brink of madness. Timmy, too young to understand what was happening, clung to Mary and refused to sleep alone. He spoke of seeing shadow people in his room and hearing strange noises at night. His once cheerful demeanor had been replaced by constant fear and anxiety. The breaking point came one stormy night. Thunder rumbled outside and the mansion seemed to groan in response. The family gathered in the living room, trying to find comfort in each other's presence. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. The wind howled, rattling the windows, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. John grabbed a flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. "Stay close," he instructed, his voice tense. "We'll get the generator running." As they made their way to the basement, the air grew colder, and the whispers turned into low, guttural growls. The shadows seemed to writhe and twist, forming sinister shapes that loomed over them. In the basement, they found the generator, but as John worked to start it, the door slammed shut behind them. The flashlight flickered and died, leaving them in pitch blackness. "John, hurry!" Mary urged, her voice trembling. "I'm trying," John replied, his hands shaking. He fumbled with the generator, finally getting it to roar to life. The lights came back on, but the sense of dread remained. They turned to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. "We're trapped," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with terror. John pounded on the door, but it was as if an invisible force was holding it shut. The whispers grew louder, turning into a cacophony of voices, each one filled with malice. In the corner of the basement, a dark shape began to form, coalescing into the figure of a man. His eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and a sinister smile spread across his face. "You cannot escape," the figure intoned, his voice echoing through the room. "This house is mine. You will all be mine." John stepped forward, his fear replaced by anger. "We will not be your prisoners," he shouted. "Leave us alone." The figure laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down their spines. "You cannot fight me. I am the darkness that dwells within these walls. I am the madness that will consume you." The lights flickered again, and the figure vanished, leaving behind an oppressive silence. The door creaked open and they stumbled out of the basement, their hearts pounding. Back in the living room, they huddled together, trying to make sense of what had happened. "We need to find a way to banish this darkness for good," John said, his voice firm. "We can't let it destroy us." Mary nodded, her resolve strengthening. "We'll contact Mr. Thompson again. There has to be something we missed. Some way to put an end to this." Sarah, clutching the photograph of Lydia, felt a renewed sense of determination. "We can't give up. We have to find a way to free this house from its curse." As the storm raged outside, the Hendersons vowed to fight the darkness that threatened to consume them. They knew the battle would be long and difficult, but they were united in their determination to reclaim their home from the malevolent forces that sought to drive them into madness. The mansion on the hill had many secrets, and the Henderson family was ready to uncover them all, no matter the cost. With the mansion's malevolent presence intensifying, the Hendersons knew they needed help. John contacted Mr. Thompson again, desperate for a solution to their escalating nightmare. Mr. Thompson arrived the next day, his expression grave as he listened to their harrowing experiences. "We must have missed something," John said, his voice tense. "The ritual didn't work as we thought. There has to be another way." Mr. Thompson nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. "The house's history is dark and complicated. There may be rituals or artifacts that we haven't yet discovered. We need to dig deeper into the mansion's past to find the key to banishing this darkness once and for all." The family, with Mr. Thompson's guidance, began a thorough search of the mansion. They combed through every room, every hidden nook and cranny, looking for clues. It was during this search that Sarah discovered a loose floorboard in the library. Beneath it, they found a small, ornate box wrapped in a faded silk cloth. John carefully opened the box, revealing a collection of ancient runes, a vial of dark liquid, and a parchment covered in cryptic symbols. Mr. Thompson examined the contents, his eyes widening in recognition. "These are elements of a powerful cleansing ritual, one far more ancient and dangerous than the one we performed before." As they studied the parchment, they realized this ritual required a blood sacrifice, an offering of their own life force to appease the spirits and break the mansion's curse. The revelation filled them with dread. but they knew it was their only hope. "We have to do this," Mary said, her voice resolute. "If we don't, the house will consume us all." John nodded, though his heart ached at the thought of putting his family in danger. "We'll do it together. Our love and strength will see us through." They gathered in the mansion's grand foyer, where the shadows seemed to gather in anticipation. The air was thick with tension as Mr. Thompson prepared the ritual space, drawing symbols on the floor with chalk and arranging the runes in a precise pattern. "Everyone must hold hands and focus on your love for each other," Mr. Thompson instructed. "This ritual will require all of your strength and unity." The family joined hands, standing in a circle around the runes. Mr. Thompson began to chant in a language that sounded ancient and otherworldly. As his voice rose, the runes glowed with a dark light, and the temperature dropped sharply. John took the vial of dark liquid and, with a steady hand, poured a few drops onto each of the runes. The liquid sizzled and hissed as it made contact, releasing a pungent metallic odor. The mansion seemed to shudder in response, and the shadows on the walls writhed and twisted. "Now," Mr. Thompson said, handing John a ceremonial dagger, "you must each offer a drop of your blood." John swallowed hard, then made a small cut on his palm, letting a drop of blood fall onto the central rune. He passed the dagger to Mary, who did the same, followed by Sarah and Timmy. The runes pulsed with a bright red light, and a low guttural growl filled the air. The darkness coalesced into a towering figure, its eyes burning with rage. "You dare to challenge me?" The figure roared, its voice shaking the walls. "We will not be your prisoners," John shouted, his voice filled with defiance. "We will free this house from your grasp." The figure lunged at them, but the circle of runes flared with a blinding light, holding it at bay. Mr. Thompson's chanting grew louder, more urgent, as he invoked the ancient powers to banish the darkness. The mansion trembled violently, and the figure writhed in agony. "No, you cannot defeat me!" it screamed, its form beginning to dissolve. "Focus!" Mr. Thompson yelled over the cacophony. "Concentrate on your love for each other!" The family tightened their grip on each other's hands, their hearts united in their determination to overcome the malevolent force. The light from the runes intensified, engulfing the dark figure completely. With a final piercing scream, the darkness exploded into a shower of black sparks which dissipated into the air. The mansion fell silent, the oppressive presence lifting, replaced by a profound sense of peace. Mr. Thompson collapsed to his knees, exhausted but triumphant. "It's over," he said, his voice weak but relieved. "The darkness is gone." The family embraced, tears of relief and joy streaming down their faces. The mansion, once a place of fear and torment, now felt warm and welcoming. But as they stood there basking in their hard-won victory, they couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was not yet complete. The mansion had many more secrets, and they were determined to uncover them all, no matter the cost. The Hendersons had faced unimaginable horrors and emerged stronger, united by their love and determination. They knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, ready to conquer any challenge that came their way. The mansion on the hill had been freed from its dark past, but its history would forever be intertwined with the brave family that had dared to reclaim it. The Henderson story was far from over, and they were prepared to write the next chapter, one filled with hope, courage, and the unbreakable bond of family. The Hendersons had achieved a temporary peace, but they knew the mansion's dark history was not fully laid to rest. The night after the cleansing ritual, an uneasy silence hung in the air, a silence that seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. In the early hours of the morning, Sarah awoke to a soft, persistent tapping on her window. She sat up, heart pounding, and saw a faint figure standing outside in the garden. It was Lydia, her face pale and eyes filled with urgency. Sarah slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her parents, and made her way to the garden. As she approached Lydia, the ghostly figure pointed towards the mansion's west wing, an area they had yet to explore thoroughly. "Sarah," Lydia's voice was a faint whisper. "You must find the hidden chamber. It holds the key to our freedom." Sarah nodded, her resolve strengthening. She returned to the house and woke her parents, explaining Lydia's message. John, Mary, and Timmy joined her, their faces set with determination. The family ventured into the west wing, which was even more decrepit and foreboding than the rest of the mansion. Cobwebs hung thickly in the corners, and the air was heavy with dust and neglect. They searched room after room, finding nothing but forgotten relics and decaying furniture. Finally, in the deepest part of the wing, they found a door that was barely visible behind a rotting tapestry. John pushed it open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air was thick with a musty, metallic scent, and a sense of dread filled them all. They descended cautiously, their flashlights casting long shadows on the walls. At the bottom of the stairs, they found a small, dimly lit chamber. In the center of the room was an ancient stone altar, covered in dark stains and surrounded by strange symbols etched into the floor. "This is it," Mr. Thompson whispered, his voice barely audible. "This is where the final ritual must be performed." The altar held a large, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. John opened it carefully, revealing detailed instructions for a ritual designed to banish the mansion's malevolent spirits permanently. But the ritual required a powerful personal sacrifice, one that would bind the family's fate to the mansion forever. As they prepared, the air grew colder, and the oppressive presence returned, more powerful and malevolent than ever. Shadows swirled around them, and the whispers grew louder, filled with anger and despair. "We have to do this together," John said, his voice steady. "No matter what happens, we must stay united." The family formed a circle around the altar, holding hands tightly. Mr. Thompson began to chant the ancient incantations, his voice echoing through the chamber. The symbols on the floor glowed with an eerie light, and the shadows coalesced into a towering dark figure, the embodiment of the mansion's malevolent force. "You cannot defeat me," the figure snarled, its voice filled with hatred. "This house is mine, and you will suffer for your defiance." John stepped forward, his eyes blazing with determination. "We will not be your prisoners. We will free this house from your darkness." The figure lunged at them, but the circle of light held it at bay. The family chanted the final words of the ritual, their voices rising in unison. The air crackled with energy, and the chamber shook violently. As the ritual reached its climax, the dark figure let out a piercing scream, its form disintegrating into a shower of black sparks. The oppressive presence lifted, replaced by a profound sense of peace and liberation. The mansion seemed to sigh with relief, its dark history finally laid to rest. The walls no longer whispered, and the shadows no longer threatened. The Hendersons had reclaimed their home, breaking the curse that had haunted it for generations. Exhausted but triumphant, the family embraced, tears of joy and relief streaming down their faces. The battle had been long and arduous, but their love and unity had seen them through. Mr. Thompson smiled, his eyes filled with pride and admiration. "You did it," he said softly. "The mansion is free." As they stood in the chamber, basking in their victory, Sarah felt a gentle touch on her shoulder. She turned to see Lydia, her face radiant and peaceful. "Thank you," Lydia whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "You have given us peace." With that, Lydia's spirit faded, joining the other freed souls as they moved on to the next world. The mansion was no longer a place of fear and torment. It had become a sanctuary of hope and renewal. The Hendersons knew their journey was far from over. They would continue to uncover the mansion's secrets, preserving its history and honoring the lives that had been lost. But they were no longer afraid. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, united by their love and courage. The mansion on the hill had been transformed, a testament to the power of family and the unbreakable bond that held them together. The Hendersons had written their own story, one of triumph and resilience, and they were ready to face whatever the future held, knowing they could conquer any challenge as long as they stood together. The Henderson family had enjoyed several days of peace after the intense battle in the mansion's hidden chamber. However, the reprieve was short-lived. Although the atmosphere was lighter, there remained a persistent unease, a subtle indication that not all was resolved. The feeling of dread intensified one evening when Sarah began acting strangely again. She had been quieter than usual, and her eyes had a distant, glazed look. That night, Mary found her standing in front of the mirror, whispering to her reflection. "Sarah, are you okay?" Mary asked, worry evident in her voice. Sarah turned slowly, her eyes glowing faintly. "They're not all gone, Mom," she whispered. "The darkness still lingers. We didn't finish the ritual." Panic surged through Mary. She called John and Mr. Thompson, who came rushing to Sarah's room. Mr. Thompson's face grew grim as he listened to Sarah's account. "The final ritual wasn't completed properly," he said. "There's a deeper, more malevolent force that we must confront. We need to finish what we started." John nodded resolutely. "What do we need to do?" Mr. Thompson explained that there was one last hidden chamber, a heart of darkness where the most powerful and ancient spirit resided. This spirit had been manipulating the others, feeding off the mansion's history of tragedy and despair. To end the hauntings for good, they needed to face this spirit and complete the ritual in its presence. The family prepared for the confrontation, gathering their courage and the necessary items for the ritual. Mr. Thompson led them to the mansion's cellar, where they found a concealed door hidden behind a wine rack. The door led to a narrow, winding staircase that descended deep into the earth. As they descended, the air grew colder and the darkness more oppressive. The staircase opened into a vast underground cavern, its walls lined with ancient symbols and flickering torches. In the center of the cavern stood a massive stone altar, surrounded by an eerie, pulsating glow. The malevolent spirit materialized above the altar, a towering figure of shadow and flame. Its eyes burned with an otherworldly fire, and its voice echoed through the cavern. "You dare challenge me in my domain?" it roared. John stepped forward, his voice unwavering. "We're here to end this. You have no power over us." The spirit laughed, a chilling sound that reverberated through the cavern. "Foolish mortals, you cannot defeat me. I am the darkness that dwells within these walls, and I will consume you all." Mr. Thompson began the ritual, chanting the ancient incantations with a force that shook the very ground. The family joined hands around the altar, their voices rising in unison. The spirit howled in rage, lashing out with tendrils of darkness. As the ritual reached its climax, the air crackled with energy, and the symbols on the walls glowed with an intense light. The spirit writhed in agony, its form flickering and distorting. "No! You cannot banish me!" It screamed. John, Mary, Sarah, and Timmy held their ground, their love and unity creating a shield of light that protected them from the spirit's assault. With a final, powerful incantation, the ritual completed, and the spirit exploded in a burst of blinding light. The cavern fell silent, the oppressive darkness lifted. The air grew warm, and a profound sense of peace filled the space. The family collapsed to their knees, exhausted but victorious. Mr. Thompson smiled weakly, his face pale but relieved. "It's over," he said softly. "The darkness is gone." The Hendersons embraced, tears of joy and relief streaming down their faces. They had faced unimaginable horrors and emerged stronger, united by their love and determination. As they made their way back up the staircase, the mansion seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by a warmth and light that had been missing for generations. The house was no longer a place of fear and torment. It had become a sanctuary of hope and renewal. The Hendersons knew their journey was far from over. They would continue to uncover the mansion's secrets, preserving its history and honoring the lives that had been lost. But they were no longer afraid. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, united by their love and courage. The mansion on the hill had been transformed, a testament to the power of family and the unbreakable bond that held them together. The Hendersons had written their own story, one of triumph and resilience, and they were ready to face whatever the future held, knowing they could conquer any challenge as long as they stood together.